So, afternoon everyone. My name is Dom, and this is my TED talk. First off, don't let that just mislead you. I'm not going to ramble on about Star Wars for 10 minutes, as much as I'd love to. No, the question I'm going to be answering today, and I've been putting the last couple of months of research into, is how are books adapted into film? So the question concerns the process in which filmmakers, directors, use to adapt written word into moving image. So I won't be going into too much depth into the actual processes of making the entire film, just the necessary detail or anything to add context to the topic at hand. So it's an interesting field in film and media in general, because it's essentially the combination or translation of two different art forms. So reading is a much more active experience. It requires the reader to want to progress the plot at their own pace. So in that way, it's a lot more personal experience, whereas watching films is a lot more passive, because you're sitting there, you're allowing the plot to progress at the pace that the filmmakers set it out to be. Obviously, both require some more investment in the plot and the characters, but are both just access that bit differently. So we're going to be talking about a number of filmmakers and authors today. So we've got J.K. Rowling. That's not happening. As much as I love the films and the books, there's so many of them, and she keeps making them. We be here all week. So yeah. Peter Jackson, same story. So we've got Stephen King, Kubrick, Ernest Cline, Spielberg, Arthur C. Clarke, and Kubrick. Yeah, a bit of a fanboy. So Stephen King, he wrote a novel called The Shining. It was very popular, and Stanley Kubrick rang him up and said, "Hey, aren't ghost stories essentially fundamentally optimistic?" And what he meant by that was the notion of someone living past death. He felt that it contradicted the horror genre. And Stephen King replied, "Well, what about hell?" And Kubrick, a very firm atheist, said, "I don't believe in hell." And this pretty much defines the difference between the two men, because King wasn't referring to the biblical Christian hell. He was basically saying that, what if the concept of someone living past death is in itself a literal hell? And Kubrick never really understood that. And there's a number of differences between the book and the film, mainly with the character of Jack, and the fact that in the book his progression towards insanity is a lot more kind of slow burn, as the supernatural forces kind of slowly take their toll on him, whereas in the film he's pretty much insane from the get-go, which, to Jack Nicholson's credit, he's good at doing that. He's good at being angry and insane. And also you have the character of Wendy, which King describes in the film as being probably one of the most misogynist characters ever portrayed on film, who's basically just there to scream. Whereas in the book she has a lot more character to her. She's a lot more the heroic, motherly figure who ends up saving their child. Also, there's some other minor differences as well. Like, for example, in the book there's these sort of like hedge creatures, and they managed to pull it off in like this mini-series, but they were kind of CGI and they didn't look very real. And Kubrick said, "No, we haven't got the budget to do that, and so we'll make a maze instead, which had like hedges, which thematically it kind of has the same effect." But he didn't want to do that because they didn't have the budget. And even though he spent 2 years trying to get a very specific shot of blood coming out of an elevator, but I mean, you've got to put your priorities somewhere, haven't you? So that's The Shining. Ernest Cline, he wrote a book that came out in 2011 called Ready Player One. In 2010, before he had even released the book, he started writing a screenplay with someone called Zach Penn, who would end up being one of the co-writers for the film. And that screenplay, as well as the book, made its way into Warner Brothers and eventually into the hands of Steven Spielberg, who read the script first and loved it, and then read the book and he realised just what it had, what potential it had. But he also noticed that it heavily references Spielberg's work, and he did when he came on board to direct the film, he didn't want it to just reference his work. He didn't want it to just be like a compilation or like a celebration of all of his work. He wanted it to, actually, not have something to tell. So a lot of the references or story beats are kind of changed or cut out completely because he felt that it referenced him too much, and he didn't want to do that. So that's Ready Player One. Arthur C. Clarke, he wrote a book, a short story called The Sentinel, which Kubrick read. As in his early life, Kubrick didn't believe in reading for pleasure. He found reading for pleasure was too much of a distraction. He'd much rather like to read if it aided his work in high school or photography. He was very much into photography as a young adult. In fact, he was a photographer for Look magazine actually in New York. But he started reading more sort of novels later in life. So, after his first few films, like there's like some Strange Love and things like that, and he came across Arthur C. Clarke, and I love Kubrick's description of him actually, because he describes Arthur C. Clarke as writing with almost a poetic nature, as if, and he's able to give inanimate objects such as stars or planets, and not personalities, but sort of a sentience to them, as if they're all partaking in a grand cosmic ballet. And they both started working on the screenplay, and they spent 4 hours every day working for 2 years working on the screenplay. That's just the screenplay, and I think that's just because it was a short story. Certain things had to be expanded upon so it would fulfill the sort of movie 2 hour and 2.5 hour run time. And even though a lot of his work is based on books, I think 2001 was the one he was able to kind of put his own edge on it, because he had to expand it that bit more. And so that brings us to the end of the presentation. I hope you all enjoyed that, and any questions.